Hey guys, tonight we are heading somewhere you probably didn't expect for a bedtime story. Into the middle of a medieval village, on the edge of nowhere, just as something mildly ridiculous but strangely memorable is about to unfold. Before we get too far, remember, if you enjoy these little nighttime wanderings through history, give the video a like, hit subscribe, and maybe tap that bell so you won't miss when we drift into another strange corner of the past. Also, before you settle in, drop a quick comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is right now, because I'm genuinely curious about who else in the world is awake with us at this hour. Alright, now grab your blanket, sink a little deeper into wherever you are, bed, couch, or the comfy chair you secretly stole from the living room, and let's take our first quiet steps into this place together. The sun is just slipping down behind a row of crooked thatched roofs, spilling a slow gold light into narrow rutted lanes. The air is cool enough that you can see a thin mist rising off the fields beyond the wooden palisade. You catch the faint smell of wood smoke from kitchen fires, mingled with the far more tempting scent of bread cooling on a windowsill somewhere nearby. There's the soft creak of a cartwheel, the low bleat of a goat, and somewhere the distant, lazy thump of a mallet on wood, as someone hammers the last repairs before nightfall. This is a place where time feels unhurried, where every sound is small and sharp because the world is so quiet. People move about their business slowly, mostly because the day is ending, but also because no one is in any great rush here. A man in a wool tunic passes by with a bundle of firewood on his shoulder, nodding at you as if you've been here your whole life. Chickens strut right across your path like they own the road, which, to be fair, they sort of do. And yet, under all this calm, there's a new hum in the air. Not a sound, exactly, more like a feeling. You notice the way a woman at the well scratches her arm without thinking, then glances around as if checking to see if anyone noticed. You catch two boys whispering in the corner of a doorway, their eyes darting between each other and a strange reddish patch on one boy's neck. It's the sort of thing you might dismiss if it happened once, but here you're starting to see it in small, repeating patterns. A few villagers trade quick words in low voices, leaning in just a little closer than usual. Something's being passed along, a half-formed rumor, or perhaps just an observation they can't quite make sense of yet. It's not fear you're feeling here, not even worry. It's more like the start of curiosity. This isn't the kind of illness that sweeps in like a hammer, no. If anything, it arrives like an annoying little cousin, tugging at sleeves, scratching at elbows, poking its nose in where it doesn't belong. No one here knows yet that it will ripple quietly through the village before the month is out. You wander further, past the blacksmith's open shed, where the smell of hot iron and charcoal curls in the cool air. He's tapping out the edge of a blade, but between hammer blows you notice him scratching the back of his hand with the handle of the tongs, eyes half-lidded, like he's not even aware he's doing it. Over by the baker's door, a girl with her hair in braids rubs her forearm against her apron and frowns. The sky deepens to a violet blue, the first stars winking into being above. A bell rings somewhere, low and mellow, and the sound folds itself into the evening. Doors begin to close softly along the street, but light still spills in golden rectangles onto the packed dirt. There's a quiet sense that whatever this little itch is, it's not going to go away by morning. You catch a scrap of conversation as you pass a couple of men lingering outside the tavern. Must be the straw, one says. Not the straw, the other mutters. It's the grain. Bad grain will get you every time. The first man snorts. Nah, it's those rats. Saw 3 of them in the mill last week. The word rats lands in the air like a tiny, unwelcome pebble in a still pond. People have always lived alongside them here. They're just part of the scenery, but you notice the way the first man glances at the shadows along the street, as if the rats might be listening. Somewhere behind you, A door opens and slams again, the sound sharp in the gathering night. The smell of damp earth is stronger now as the day's heat slips away. You wrap your cloak, or blanket, tighter, feeling that little thrill you get when you're in on the start of something. You're not just watching history tonight, you're standing in it, with the first faint tremors of a strange, harmless, but persistent little plague at your feet. And right now, the village has no idea that in the weeks to come, this will be the most talked about thing since the travelling peddler dropped his cart into the river. They also don't know that the whole episode will be remembered with more laughter than fear. You take one last look up the main street before turning toward the tavern yourself, following the smell of ale and the promise of overheard rumours. The air is full of small sounds now. The scrape of wooden shutters, the rattle of a bucket chain, the clink of a metal latch. All of it weaving into the kind of evening you'll remember, even if it's for something as ridiculous as a mysterious village-wide itch. Inside the tavern, the light hits you first, warm and a little smoky, the kind that makes everyone's face look a shade more flushed than they probably are. The smell comes second, a heavy mix of roasted onions, yeast, and a hint of wet wool from cloaks drying near the fire. The place isn't crowded yet, but the people here have the sort of posture that says they've been sitting for a while and are in no hurry to leave. You slide onto a bench against the wall, the wood worn smooth from countless elbows and mugs being thumped in emphasis. The bench creaks in a friendly sort of way, like it's welcoming you to sit down and listen to things you probably shouldn't. Across the room, a farmer leans over his cup, scratching the back of his neck while talking to his neighbour. At another table, a pair of younger men keep tugging at their sleeves, as if trying to hide something on their forearms. The thing is, no one here looks particularly sick. No one's pale or feverish. It's more like they're all experiencing that one mosquito bite you can't quite ignore, multiplied by a handful of spots. A serving girl bustles past, balancing 3 mugs of ale and a small loaf of bread. She sets them down with the kind of grace only years of practice can give, but you catch the moment she shifts the tray to one hand so she can rub her upper arm in quick, irritated circles. She doesn't even seem to notice she's doing it. The man sitting nearest you leans sideways and mutters, "Started with my boy. Came in from the field scratching like mad. Thought it was nettles, but then the wife caught it, too." He takes a swig, wipes his mouth, and adds, "Now the whole blasted street's at it." It's funny. No one here is afraid, but everyone's acting like this is the most inconvenient thing to happen in months. Which, frankly, it might be. This is a place where news doesn't move quickly unless it's about crops failing, a fight breaking out, or a cart overturning on market day. But now you can feel the itch, both literal and figurative, spreading through the conversation. In the corner, an old man with a beard that looks like it's holding on out of sheer stubbornness is telling his tale. "When I was young, we had a rash went round. Looked like red flowers up and down the arms. Whole village thought we'd been cursed by a passing monk. Turned out to be from sleeping in damp hay. This'll be the same, mark my words." Of course, someone else immediately counters, No, this is worse. Saw my cousin's neighbour, and he had spots on his spots. If it's not the rats, it's the new straw from the miller. You ever smell that stuff? Like old socks and cabbage." There's laughter at that, half amusement, half agreement. You get the sense that while no one's exactly panicking, everyone is storing away their own private theory to share later. A dog ambles in through the open door, sniffs around for scraps, and pauses to scratch vigorously behind its ear. You can almost hear the unspoken thought ripple through the room. Great. Now even the animals have it. The tavern keeper himself is making the rounds, topping up mugs and clapping people on the shoulder. He doesn't seem particularly concerned, though you do notice him rubbing at his jawline with the side of his hand between conversations. The fire pops and shifts, throwing sparks up into the chimney. You can feel the heat on your face, hear the low hum of voices blending with the occasional burst of laughter. Every now and then, someone's scratching interrupts the rhythm of it all. A sleeve pulled back, a quick rub, a slight wince. And yet, outside the tavern walls, the village is sliding into night as usual. There's no curfew, no locked doors, no one peering out from behind shutters. Just this shared, growing awareness that something odd is making the rounds. Historians still wonder if small, localized outbreaks like this were ever recorded, or if they were simply too minor for chroniclers to care about. The big plagues made it into the annals. The deadly fevers, the sweeping famines, those got ink. But the more harmless ones, they probably dissolved into memory, living on only in stories told to grandchildren about that summer everyone itched for no reason. You take a sip of the ale the tavern keeper finally brings you. It's slightly sour, the way ale often is when it's been sitting a while, but it's warming. Outside, you hear the muffled clip of hooves on packed dirt and the creak of a wagon wheel. Then the sound fades into the dark. The man beside you has moved on to describing, rather graphically, how much worse the itching is at night. It's like the spots know you're trying to sleep, he says, scratching at his shoulder for emphasis. They wait until you've just drifted off, and then bam, one starts up, then another and another, until you're tossing like a fish on a pier. He grins, though, like he knows he's exaggerating for effect. The whole table chuckles, and someone slaps him on the back. You glance around the room one last time. The talk is louder now, the scratching more frequent. The first itches have appeared, and they've already taken on a life of their own. An irritation and a topic rolled into one, perfect for fueling the long, slow evenings ahead. By morning, the village feels a little different, not panicked, not even hurried, but definitely buzzier than usual. The mist still clings low over the fields, and the roosters have only just stopped their enthusiastic announcements, but people are already out, talking in small knots along the lanes. You can tell because the sound of conversation carries easily in the crisp early air. Short bursts of voices, quick laughs, and the occasional "well, I never tossed into the mix." The itch has officially made itself at home. It's not just the arms anymore. You notice a man tugging at the side of his tunic to scratch his ribs, and a woman pausing mid-step to bend down and rub her calf. No one's keeling over in pain, but there's a shared look on faces now, a sort of resigned "oh, you too." And now, you meet the culprits, not directly at first, but in signs, little black droppings in a corner near the grain sacks, the faintest rustle under a pile of straw, a blur of movement that vanishes into a gap beneath the mill's door. The rats are here, as they always have been, only they're acting like they own the place, which, from their perspective, they probably do. It's not the rats themselves doing the itching, though. It's their tiny jumping passengers, fleas, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, all happily hitching rides, feeding where they please, and generally treating the village like an all-inclusive resort. You catch sight of one of the mill boys sweeping near the grain bins. He pauses to slap at his ankle, muttering something under his breath. The mill is prime flea territory, dark, warm, and full of food. The sacks of wheat and barley are like high-rise apartments for pests, with every grain kernel another little buffet table. Here's the thing, fleas aren't picky. They'll bite rats, sure, but they'll also bite humans, dogs, cats, and probably anything else that stands still long enough. And in a place where straw lines the floors, livestock share space with people, and laundry dries slowly in the damp air, fleas can get pretty comfortable. There's a certain energy to the hunt now. A couple of children crouch near the barn door, watching intently as their cat makes a low, sinuous stalk toward a twitching, whiskered nose in the shadows. The cat pounces, emerges with a wriggling rat, and trots away like it's the most normal thing in the world, which here it is. The kids cheer, then immediately go back to scratching their own arms. The baker, standing at his doorway dusted in flour, tells anyone who'll listen that this all started after a wagon load of grain arrived from up north. No one specifies where up north is exactly, but everyone nods like it explains everything. A carpenter swears it's because the weather's been warmer than usual, letting the little jumpers breed faster. Someone else says they've seen more cats than ever lately, which must mean more rats, which must mean more fleas. You walk past the blacksmith's shop again and spot him lifting his leather apron to scratch his stomach in long, slow drags. Doesn't bother me, he insists to the man he's talking to, though the movement of his hand says otherwise. Historians still wonder how much medieval people really understood about the flea-rat connection before the big plagues hit. In truth, they probably saw it more as an unpleasant coincidence than a direct cause. If you lived here, rats were just a fact of life, like rain in winter or the smell of cabbage soup. Fleas were just part of the package, irritating, yes, but not mysterious. Still, there's something about seeing more of them than usual that makes people uneasy, even if they won't admit it. A woman sweeping her stoop throws the dust right at a scurrying rat, sending it darting away with a squeak. She watches it disappear, mutters something sharp, then leans her broom against the wall to scratch both her ankles in quick succession. By midday, the sun is bright enough to throw clear light into every alley, every doorway, every gap between boards. And in that light, you sometimes see it, the flicker of something tiny leaping from shadow to shadow. If you didn't know better, you might mistake it for dust, until it lands on someone's skin, and they slap at it like they've been personally insulted. A cart rattles into the village square, its driver announcing he's here to trade wool. The wool is piled high in the back, soft and inviting, and, if the driver's constant scratching is anything to go by, probably swarming with unwanted passengers. Still, he hops down cheerfully, waving to friends, oblivious to the fact that he's just delivered another flea-filled gift to the community. For now, there's no plan to stop it. People will sweep, shake out blankets, and set traps for rats, but no one's losing sleep over it. Not yet. It's just one of those seasonal things, like pollen or flies in summer. You'll complain, you'll scratch, and you'll wait it out. Still, you can't shake the feeling that this is just the beginning. The fleas are busy, the rats are plentiful, and the villagers haven't yet realized how stubborn an itch can be once it's decided to settle in. By evening, the tavern is noisier than usual, and not just because of the ale. The itch has worked its way into the day's conversations like a catchy song no one particularly likes but can't stop humming. You step inside and immediately catch the low, constant murmur of voices, the occasional burst of laughter, and the unmistakable sound of knuckles dragging over wool sleeves. This is where the gossip mill is running at full tilt. The big table near the fire is packed shoulder to shoulder, elbows knocking, tankards clinking, and stories spilling like spilled beer. Frothy, a little messy, and prone to exaggeration. Someone swears his cousin's rash is shaped like a map of the Holy Land. Someone else claims they heard about a man who caught it just from looking at a sack of grain. The whole group roars with disbelief, but you can see a few brows furrow, because what if? At the back, a group of women lean in over their mugs, speaking in quick bursts. One of them, a woman with a headscarf tied low over her brow, gestures toward her arm and whispers something that makes the others clap hands over their mouths in mock horror. You don't catch the words, but you can guess the gist. Someone they know has it worse, and they're gleefully relieved it isn't them. The tavern keeper seems to be enjoying the new source of entertainment. As he refills mugs, he adds his own theory. It's the moon. The moon's been brighter this month, haven't you noticed? Brings all manner of pestilence out. Ask the old almanacs. He says it with such authority that two men at the bar nod along, as though lunar cycles and itchy elbows have always been connected. Every so often, a loud, "Now listen here," rings out as someone begins their own version of events. You realize quickly that half the fun isn't in the story itself, but in watching the storyteller scratch between sentences, trying to make it look like a dramatic hand gesture. Some of the talk even drifts into mild superstition. A thin man with a long nose claims he saw a rat near the churchyard that looked him dead in the eye before vanishing into the grass. He swears it was an omen. Across the table, a young woman argues that it's not the rats at all. It's bad air from the marsh, rising up in the warm evenings. She says it like she's revealing a well-guarded secret, though she's already told 3 other people the same thing tonight. You notice how the gossip serves 2 purposes at once. It explains the problem, however wildly, and it keeps everyone entertained. A village doesn't get many novelties, and this rash, irritating as it is still a welcome distraction from the usual talk about weather and harvests. There's a moment near the middle of the room when the conversation dips. Not stops exactly, but softens, because a man at the door has just walked in with sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing bright red spots that climb halfway up his arms. He's grinning, either because he's decided to lean into the drama, or because the itching has reached that so bad you have to laugh stage. A few people gasp softly, others whistle, and one man immediately leans toward his friend to whisper, "Told you it was spreading." The newcomer makes a show of scratching, muttering something about how it's nothing a pint won't fix, and heads straight for the bar. Historians still wonder how many of these casual, tavern-born rumors shaped how medieval communities responded to real outbreaks. Here, you can see how quickly fact and fiction blend, how an itch becomes a story, and how a story becomes truth, at least until the next one comes along. The ale keeps flowing, the benches grow warmer, and the air thickens with heat and smoke. Every now and then you hear the scratch of nails on skin, a sound you wouldn't even notice if it weren't happening so often. Somewhere, a chair scrapes across the floor, a dog barks outside, and the talk shifts seamlessly from rashes to last year's travelling performers, then back again. By the time you step outside, the night air feels sharp and cool, cutting through the warmth of the tavern. The moon is high, spilling pale light over the rooftops, and the lanes are quiet except for the distant clatter of a cart heading toward the mill. You can still hear faint laughter from inside, gossip echoing like the aftertaste of strong ale. But underneath it all, you can't help thinking that tomorrow there will be more scratching, more stories, and probably a few new theories that will sound just as ridiculous and just as convincing. By morning, the air outside smells faintly of damp earth and smoke, and you find yourself wandering toward a row of houses where the doors are propped open to let in the cool breeze. Inside, kitchens are alive with quiet industry, pots clinking, spoons scraping, fires popping softly. The itch has worked its way into the rhythm of daily chores now, and people are adapting in their own peculiar ways. One woman is bent over a table, chopping onions with swift, practiced strokes. Every so often, she pauses to rub her wrist against the edge of the table before going right back to slicing. Above her head, bundles of dried herbs hang from the rafters, rosemary, thyme, lavender, and something that smells sharp and almost metallic, probably yarrow. The scent is thick enough to make you blink. A neighbor leans in the doorway holding what looks like a bundle of twigs tied together with red thread. "Hang this by the bed," she says matter-of-factly. "Keeps the bad air away." She says it like she's stating a proven law of nature. Whether or not it works, you suspect it's really just an excuse to do something, because doing nothing is far worse. In another house, a grandmother sits by the fire, stirring a pot of something dark and sticky. The steam smells oddly pleasant, sweet at first, then bitter, like honey mixed with boiled bark. She ladles a bit into a clay bowl, blows on it, and then smears it onto the forearm of a boy who's been fidgeting and scratching since you walked in. He makes a face but doesn't complain. Goose fat and ash, she explains proudly. Draws the itch right out. Whether that's based on any science is doubtful, but the boy certainly smells like a very seasoned roast. Herbs and charms are everywhere now. Someone's tied a garland of garlic bowls above their door, even though fleas aren't exactly known for being repelled by the stuff. But garlic is supposed to chase away something, and that's good enough for most people here. Another family has placed a small wooden carving of Saint Roch on their mantel, the saint's hand lifted in eternal blessing, as though he might personally shoo away whatever pestilence is at work. The thing is, in this village, medicine isn't a neat divide between real and superstitious. It's more like a tangled braid. Bits of herbal knowledge, religious ritual, and plain old habit, all knotted together. A sprig of mint in the pillow for good sleep. Sure. A prayer whispered over boiling water. Absolutely. And if you rub your skin with vinegar while chanting a rhyme about the moon. Well, why not cover all bases? You pass a small boy sitting cross-legged in the dirt, carefully rubbing the inside of a walnut shell along his shin. It keeps them off, he says when he catches you looking. Whether he means the fleas or the itch itself isn't clear, but he's doing it with great seriousness, so you nod like it's the best idea you've ever heard. There's a gentle comedy to it all, the earnestness with which each person swears their method works, even as they scratch mid-sentence. You can see how these things become traditions, passed down not because they're flawless, but because they're part of the shared experience. Historians still wonder how many of these cules actually had any measurable effect. Some herbs might have soothed the skin or masked body sense enough to confuse fleas. Others were probably just psychological comfort, the kind of thing that makes you feel better because you're doing something. But in a world without microscopes or germ theory, cause and effect is a slippery thing, and the line between healing and hope is nearly invisible. You find yourself in the square again, where an older man is selling little cloth pouches filled with crushed mint and lavender. He calls them flea charms, and he's doing brisk business. People tie them to belts, slip them under hats, or hand them around their necks like amulets. Do they work? Probably not, but they smell far nicer than the goose fat. By the time the sun is high, the air in the village is a jumble of scents, garlic, herbs, smoke, and the faint tang of vinegar. Everywhere you look, there's some visible sign of the collective battle against the itch. Bunches of sage drying in windows, chalk marks above doorways, ribbons tied to fence posts. And yet, the fleas remain unfazed. They jump, they bite, they carry on with their tiny, infuriating lives. The villagers will keep fighting them anyway, partly because it's the only way they know, and partly because in a place like this, the act of fighting is half the point. The market day dawns bright and brisk, and with it comes a fresh wave of chatter. You hear it before you even see the stalls, voices rising and falling, calling out prices, laughing at jokes, and more often than not, pausing mid-sentence to scratch. The market square smells like a dozen different mornings stacked on top of each other. Fresh bread from the baker's stall, the sharp tang of raw onions, the sweet hint of honeycomb, the damp musk of wool, and the faint animal scent drifting over from the pen where a goat is loudly announcing its opinions about life. Somewhere, a pot of spiced cider simmers over an open flame, the steam curling into the cool air. Here, the itch has become both a nuisance and a selling point. A woman selling linen handkerchiefs waves on at you and says, perfect for dabbing, scratching, or hiding unsightly spots. The fishmonger, not to be outdone, claims his salted cod will drive the fleas clean out of your blood, which sounds questionable, but is delivered with such confidence you almost want to believe it. Between the bread stall and the weaver's cart, A small crowd has gathered around a man holding up a jar of thick green paste. Boil it in water, breathe the steam, and you'll never itch again, he promises. Someone asks what's in it, and he lowers his voice to say, "A secret passed to me by a monk from the far mountains." The dramatic pause is slightly ruined when he reaches down to scratch his ankle. The thing about the market is that it's more than just buying and selling. It's a news exchange, a rumor depot, and a stage for anyone with a story to tell. And right now, the rash is the headline. You overhear a trader explaining to his customer that it started in another village, 3 days' ride from here, and that theirs was much worse. A baker claims she's heard of people being covered head to toe in spots. The woman buying her bread responds that she knows for a fact it's not the rats at all, but the new miller's flour, ground so fine it seeps right into the skin. By the time you reach the far end of the market, you've counted at least 6 different causes, 4 miracle cures, and 2 dramatic retellings that sound more like campfire ghost stories than medical theories. And the best part, everyone believes their version, at least until they hear a better one. In the middle of the square, a juggler is tossing 3 wooden balls into the air, drawing a small crowd of children. He pauses to scratch his neck, catches the balls again, and winks. "It's the fleas making me faster," he says, launching into his act once more. The children squeal with laughter, and you can't tell whether they're more impressed by the juggling or by the idea of fleas as performance enhancers. Historians still wonder how marketplaces shaped the spread of both diseases and the stories about them. Here, you can see it happening in real time. The rash itself might not be dangerous, but the stories have legs, long, hopping legs, much like the pests at the heart of it all. You stop by a stall selling honey cakes, and the vendor tells you to eat one each morning before speaking to ward off the itch. She's clearly just trying to sell you cakes, but you admire the creativity. Behind you, 2 older men argue about whether burning sage on the hour actually works, one of them fanning himself with a bunch of it as he talks. By midday, the market is thinning out. Some people leave with full baskets and new ideas for cures. Others leave with nothing but an extra itch or 2 picked up from brushing past strangers. As you wander out of the square, you hear a final cheerful shout from the man selling the green paste. "Last jar. Guaranteed to work until it doesn't." He grins at his own joke, pockets the coin, and scratches the back of his hand. By late afternoon, the sun has mellowed into a softer gold, and the long shadows of the houses stretch lazily across the lanes. The air feels warm but not oppressive, and yet the mood of the village has shifted, because the rash is no longer a novelty. It's become a shared itchy burden, and people are starting to get creative in how they talk about it. You see it first in the way they compare their spots. 2 women stand near the well, sleeves rolled up, holding out forearms like they're displaying rare fabrics. "Mine's got edges," one says, tracing a red blotch with her finger, "like little crowns." The other shakes her head. "No, mine's worse. Looks like a rooster's footprint." They laugh, but there's an odd pride in their voices, as though unusual spot shapes are a mark of distinction. By now, explanations for the outbreak have expanded into full-blown theories, the kind that would be laughed off if they weren't delivered with absolute seriousness. A bearded man tells a group outside the tavern that it's clearly the fault of angry saints. He gestures upward vaguely, as though the saints in question might be eavesdropping from a cloud. "We've been lax with feast days," he insists. They've sent a gentle warning before the real punishment. A younger man offers a different view. "It's not saints, it's the barley. We've been eating from last year's stalls too long. Bad grain gets in your blood." He says this while chewing a hunk of bread without the slightest hint of irony. There's also talk of bad water from the well, evil wind from the east, and perhaps most bizarrely, moonlight poisoning, which, as far as anyone can tell, involves sleeping with your window open on the wrong phase of the moon. Children have joined in the theorizing, though theirs is less scientific and more whimsical. One small girl informs you very seriously that the rash comes from touching the wrong kind of frog. A friend, equally sullen, says it's because someone stole a witch's cat. The way they whisper this last part makes you think they might know exactly which cat they mean. Historians still wonder whether medieval villagers truly believed every explanation they voiced, or whether some theories were just for entertainment. From what you've seen, it might be a mix of both. Belief blurred with performance, each person adding their own twist to the story like a link in a chain. By the blacksmith's shed, a group of men are testing out what they call preventative measures. One has tied strips of cloth dipped in vinegar around his wrists and ankles, claiming it will block the little jumpers. Another has rubbed his skin with ash from the forge, saying it dries out the evil humours. You watch as they scratch anyway, then nod to each other like the plan is clearly working. There's something almost festive about the inventiveness of it all. Even the local priest, normally the voice of stern reason, has started wearing a sprig of rosemary pinned to his robe, muttering something about spiritual and earthly protection. You're not sure if he means it as a blessing or a bug repellent. As evening approaches, the lanes fill with the scent of stewing vegetables and roasting meat, mingling with the sharper smells of vinegar, garlic, and smoke from herb bundles tossed into the hearth. Every house seems to be trying something, rubbing, hanging, sprinkling, chanting. None of it seems to stop the rash, but at least it gives everyone something to do while they scratch. And so the village ends the day with more questions than answers, united not by fear, but by the strange camaraderie of shared discomfort. The rash has become a conversation starter, a badge of participation, and, if you listen closely, a kind of small-town entertainment in its own right. The night settles in slow and quiet, as though the sky is tucking the village under a heavy dark blanket. The moon is a pale slice tonight, hanging low enough that it feels like it might catch on the rooftops. Somewhere in the distance, a dog gives a single bark and then decides it's too much effort to do it again. Inside the houses, however, there's no such peace. The scratching has begun. It's a sound you wouldn't notice in the day, a small repetitive noise, but in the stillness of night it's everywhere. Wooden beds creak as people shift around, blankets rustle, nails scrape lightly against skin. It's like the whole village is performing a very slow, very itchy symphony. You can picture it clearly. A man lying on his straw mattress, trying to keep perfectly still so as not to wake his wife, only to give in with a slow, deliberate scratch that he swears will be the last. Across the lane, a child kicks off a blanket in frustration, muttering about crawling things. Of course, no one is simply enduring this in silence. This is the hour of remedies, those last desperate experiments people save for when the day's distractions are gone. Someone is rubbing goose fat along their forearms because their grandmother swore by it. Another family is trying a prayer chant, the same few words repeated softly, as if the rhythm alone might scare away the irritation. You catch the faint scent of garlic drifting from one house and from another, the sharper tang of vinegar. A lesser-known quirk of the medieval household becomes obvious now. Not every bed is meant for sleeping. Some people, fearing that their usual spot has bad air, have dragged bedding into odd corners. Kitchens, lofts, even storage rooms, believing the change in location will trick the rash into leaving them alone. One man is reportedly sleeping in his barn, which he insists feels cooler. His wife says it smells worse than itches, but he's committed. Historians still wonder whether the nighttime rituals were more about actual relief or about giving people a sense of control. After all, the dark in a medieval village could feel endless, and if you can't sleep, you might as well tinker with a solution. Every so often, a faint laugh cuts through the quiet, a sign that two people awake in the same house have given up on trying to sleep and are swapping absurd theories again. Perhaps the fleas have a preferred side of the bed, someone jokes, so they agree to swap positions tomorrow. You step outside for a moment, letting the cooler air brush against your skin. The village at night smells of damp earth, hay, and the faint, lingering smoke from the cooking fires. The moonlight glints on the edges of rooftops and makes the puddles in the lane look like little pools of polished pewter. From here, you can hear the entire village in miniature, coughs, whispers, the occasional scrape of a nail, and a rooster who, for reasons known only to himself, has decided it's time to practice crowing. Somewhere, the church bell gives a faint metallic groan as it sways in the breeze. No one will ring it tonight. It's too late for announcements, and too early for the morning call, but its presence is a reminder of how close-knit this place is. Tomorrow, the scratching will start again in daylight, and so will the gossip, the remedies, and the little acts of neighbourly comparison. But for now, the village drifts between wakefulness and sleep, caught in that restless state where dreams hover just out of reach. And in that half-sleep, perhaps, there's a strange comfort, knowing that even if you're awake at this hour, you're far from the only one. By morning, the restless scratching of the night has already become part of the day's gossip. But before the market opens or the tavern stirs, the first place people drift toward is the church. Not because anyone thinks it's a miracle cure, but because in a village like this, the church is equal parts house of worship, community notice board, and, depending on the priest, mild entertainment. The church itself is cool inside, the thick stone walls holding onto the night air. Beeswax candles burn low near the altar, their scent mingling with the faint mustiness of damp wood. As you step in, you can hear the quiet shuffle of feet on the flagstones, the occasional cough, and of course, the sound of someone trying discreetly to scratch the back of their neck while pretending to listen intently. The priest stands at the front, a solemn figure in robes that have seen more patching than the roof. His voice echoes just enough to make everything he says sound important, even when it's a repetition of what everyone already knows. The rash is a punishment, a sign that the village must atone for something. He's a bit vague on the details. Maybe it's the gambling in the tavern. Maybe it's the lack of attendance at evening prayers. Maybe it's the new habit of adding too much salt to stew, though that one might be a personal complaint. As he speaks, you notice he pauses every so often to rub his own arm under the sleeve. He's trying to be subtle about it, but the congregation notices. The woman next to you raises her eyebrows as if to say, "And there's your divine punishment. Father's got it too." A widely accepted historical fact is that medieval clergy often acted as the main interpreters of illness, mixing religious guidance with whatever scraps of medical theory they'd heard. But here's the less-known twist. Many priests also quietly experimented with remedies themselves. Some kept little pouches of dried herbs tucked under their robes. Others dabbed their skin with vinegar water before sermons. This priest, judging by the faint whiff of rosemary every time he moves, has his own strategy. Midway through the sermon, he announces a new plan. Everyone is to avoid gathering in large crowds except for church, of course, because the Lord's presence is our protection. This earns a few suppressed chuckles. People may be faithful, but they're not oblivious. Historians still wonder how much the clergy actually believed their own interpretations, and how much was a careful balancing act to keep order in a worried community. Did this priest truly think the rash was divine punishment, or did he just know that fear kept people listening? As the service ends, people linger in the courtyard, comparing their symptoms like farmers comparing crop yields. One man insists his red spots are shrinking, though he admits he's been bathing in boiled onion water for 2 days. Another swears the scratching is worse in the church itself, which he says is proof that the devil's angry they're there. The priest walks among them, offering blessings, taking in complaints, and doing his best not to visibly scratch at the inside of his wrist. And as the bell rings again, scattering the congregation toward their day, you notice that no one's walking away with any fewer itches, but perhaps just enough reassurance to keep carrying on. By midday, the sun has turned the main square into a patchwork of light and shadow, warm stone and cool shade. The air carries the smell of bread baking somewhere nearby, mixed with the faint tanning of livestock. You're just passing the tavern when a sharp clang rings out, 3 deliberate strikes of a brass handbell. That's the signal for the town crier, and sure enough, he emerges from behind the ale barrels like an actor stepping onto stage. His coat is a little too large, his hat a little too proud, and his expression a little too serious for what's about to follow. He clears his throat twice for dramatic effect, then unrolls a piece of parchment that's already curling at the edges. He begins, projecting his voice across the square. By order of the reeve, all villagers are to inspect their bedding and grain stores for fleas, vermin, and other pestiferous creatures. The crowd gathers, half listening, half whispering to one another. Children perch on the edges of water troughs for a better view. Someone mutters that the crier's probably got fleas himself, judging by the way he keeps shifting from foot to foot. The official message is short, but the crier is a man who loves his audience, so he adds his own flourishes. Tales of giant rats spotted near the mill, whisper accounts of a farmer who swears his cow caught the rash, which he admits might have just been mud, and the stern reminder to wash your linens more than once a season. This last bit earns a scoff from a group of older men by the smithy, one of whom says, next he'll be telling us to bathe every week. One widely accepted fact: medieval town criers were more than human notice boards. They were entertainers, political mouthpieces, and occasional news exaggerators. They were often chosen for their loud voices, but also for their knack at holding a crowd's attention. Here's the quirky detail. Some town criers in small communities would deliberately inject humor into grim announcements to make them easier to swallow. A plague might be described with a sly wink as an opportunity to meet your neighbors very closely, very quickly. Historians still wonder how much of the common folk's understanding of events was shaped more by the crier's personality than by the actual facts. If a crier made the rash sound like an inconvenience instead of a crisis, did that help people stay calm, or simply keep them from taking it seriously? By the time the crier wraps up, the crowd is chuckling more than frowning. He bows with a little flourish, pockets the coin someone tosses his way, and disappears down an alley toward what you strongly suspect is the tavern's back door. People drift back to their errands, but not without swapping the juiciest bits of the announcement. Someone starts imitating the crier's pompous stance, which gets a laugh. And in the warm buzz of the square, you get the sense that for all the scratching and rash spreading, this little performance might have done more for morale than any herb or salve. The afternoon wears on, and with it comes the steady hum of village life, the creak of cartwheels, the occasional thud of a hammer at the smithy, and somewhere in the distance, the cluck and flap of a chicken that's very sure it's being pursued. You follow the narrow lane toward the apothecary's shop, drawn by the faint, mingled smells of dried flowers, vinegar, and something sharp that makes your nose prickle. The apothecary's door hangs slightly ajar, letting in a strip of sunlight that catches on the glass jars lining the shelves. Inside, the air feels thick with scents: crushed mint, earthy roots, a whisper of smoke from herbs drying above the hearth. The counter is crowded with little packets wrapped in paper, bundles of rosemary tied with string, and a few oddities in jars, things that look like pickled mushrooms but could just as easily be something's preserved organ. Behind the counter, the apothecary, an older woman with sleeves rolled up to her elbows, is measuring out a powder into a mortar. She works with brisk precision, but you can see faint reddish marks along her wrists. She doesn't mention them, and neither do you. Instead, she nods toward a bench by the wall, as if you're already expected. A widely accepted historical fact. Medieval apothecaries were not exactly doctors, but they were invaluable community healers, mixing knowledge of herbal remedies with a pinch of folklore. Many learned their craft through apprenticeship rather than formal schooling. Here's the less-known quirk. Some apothecaries deliberately kept their remedies tasting bitter or smelling terrible, not because it made them more effective, but because it convinced customers they must be working. After all, no one believed something pleasant could cure you. She slides a small clay pot across the counter toward you, its lid tied down with twine. Rub it on the spots, twice a day. If the itching worsens, try not to think about it. There's the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth, which could be humor, or just the result of years of holding back actual opinions about her patients. While she prepares the next order, she tells you about the latest rumor, that a traveling merchant passed through 2 villages over, selling anti-rash charms made from pressed copper coins. Supposedly, they work if you wear them close to the skin and avoid eating beans. She snorts. Beans have nothing to do with it. But people like to have rules. It gives them the feeling they're in control. Historians still wonder how much of medieval medicine was genuinely curative, and how much was simply about giving people a sense of agency when faced with something they couldn't fully understand. Before you leave, she slips an extra spray of lavender into your hand for the scent, and lowers her voice to suggest you wash your bedding in hot water if possible. Not common practice, but in her view, worth the effort. You thank her, step back into the sunlit street, and notice that the lavender's aroma lingers just enough to make the air smell slightly less of chickens and cart dust. The road out of the village curves gently past the churchyard, where the air feels quieter, as though even the birds are speaking in softer tones. The grass here grows unevenly, interrupted by clusters of wildflowers and the occasional worn gravestone leaning as if in mid-conversation with its neighbor. You follow a low stone wall until it opens into a meadow, the path dappled with late afternoon light. Ahead, a figure in a dark hooded cloak stands near a small cart. At first, the shape is unsettling, until you notice the cart is stacked with baskets of herbs, cloth, and bottles that catch the sun like trapped rain. The cloaked figure turns, and you see the beak-like mask, a medieval plague doctor, though for this mild epidemic, the get-up feels almost theatrical. The mask's glass eyeholes reflect the meadow in miniature, while the long beak is stuffed with fragrant plants, juniper, sage, and dried petals, meant to filter bad air. The doctor's leather gloves creak softly as they adjust the strap of a pouch, and you can't help but think the whole ensemble is part healer, part ominous bird. A widely accepted historical fact. Plague doctor masks were designed with that long beak precisely for holding aromatic herbs, which people believed could block disease-carrying miasmas. While they are most famously linked to the Black Death, similar protective garb appeared in smaller outbreaks too. The quirky detail here is that some plague doctors charged extra for premium beak blends, adding rare or exotic herbs for wealthier clients, even if those plants did nothing more than smell unusual. A touch of cinnamon or imported cloves could double the fee. The doctor speaks in a muffled voice from behind the mask, asking if anyone in your household has shown the telltale rash or an alarming fondness to scratching. You admit to having seen a few red patches around town, and the doctor nods sagely as though confirming an important theory. They produce a small vial of cloudy liquid, saying it should be taken in drops for purification of the humours. Historians still debate whether medieval plague doctors were genuinely effective in these lesser outbreaks, or if their role was more symbolic, walking embodiments of the fight against illness, reassuring people simply by their presence. As the doctor moves on toward the next village, you watch the black cloak ripple in the wind and the odd, bird-like silhouette shrink against the golden field. You notice something you hadn't before. The meadow smells faintly sweeter now, as if the herbs from that beak mask have drifted into the air and settled there, leaving you with the sense, whether true or not, that you've just walked through a thin veil of protection. The sun has begun its slow dip toward the horizon, spilling a warm amber light over the village rooftops. Shadows stretch long and lazy across the dirt lanes, and the air carries that transitional feeling. Neither the bustle of day nor the hush of night, but something in between. You find yourself wandering toward the outskirts, where a low wooden building hums with the sound of chatter and the occasional burst of laughter. It's the tavern, every settlement's unofficial nerve center. Inside, the glow from the fire pit flickers across rough-hewn tables, the smell of ale and stewed onions filling the air in a way that makes your stomach both grateful and slightly apprehensive. Wooden mugs thud onto tabletops. The dog sleeps beneath a bench, occasionally twitching its legs in some unseen dream. People are gathered in clusters, swapping stories about who has the rash, whose cousin swears they saw it vanish after eating only bread for 3 days, and how the blacksmith's apprentice insists his grandmother's itch-banishing tea is the true cure. Every tale gets more dramatic in the retelling. Someone leans close and whispers that the baker's wife claims the rush skips people who wear green on Thursdays, though no one can agree why Thursdays are special. A widely accepted historical fact. Taverns in medieval villages were vital hubs for the spread of news, gossip, and local politics. They weren't just for drinking. They were places to make deals, arrange marriages, or share warnings about illness. Here's the quirk. During outbreaks, some taverns would invent protective drinks, mixing herbs and spices into ale or wine, claiming it would ward off disease. Whether these concoctions worked is doubtful, but they certainly sold well. One tavern in France reportedly offered a scratch-proof brew that turned out to be little more than beer steeped with thyme and an excessive amount of garlic. At one corner table, 2 men are arguing, good-naturedly, about whether the rash came from bad air blowing in from the marsh or from the weaver's cat, which has recently been seen sleeping on people's laundry. Historians still wonder how much belief in these casual explanations shaped actual village behavior. People often acted more on rumor than on observation. You sip from a cup of spiced cider, its sweetness warming your chest, and notice how the tavern feels like a kind of antidote in itself, not to the rash, but to the worry about it. The laughter, the swapping of stories, even the overconfident cues, all weave together into something comforting. As the fire pops and someone begins a song that everyone seems to know, you realize that here, in the middle of this annoying plague, community might be the most reliable medicine of all. Night drapes itself slowly over the village, the last streaks of daylight fading into deep blues and purples. You step outside the tavern into the cooler air, where the smell of smoke from nearby hearths curls lazily upward. The village feels different now, quieter, more self-contained, as though the buildings themselves are tucking in for the evening. A narrow lane leads you toward the small chapel at the village's edge. Candlelight flickers from its narrow windows, spilling golden stripes onto the packed earth. Inside, the wooden pews creak under the shifting weight of a handful of villagers who have gathered not for a formal service, but for a kind of informal vigil. Someone kneels, murmuring a prayer for their children. Another fingers a string of beads. The air smells faintly of beeswax and herbs, for someone has tucked bundles of lavender and rosemary near the altar to please the saints and keep away the rash. The mixture of scents is strangely soothing, even if you're not entirely convinced of its protective powers. A widely accepted historical fact. In medieval Europe, local churches often doubled as community gathering spots during health scares. not just for prayer, but for distributing aid, coordinating care, and even storing medicinal supplies. The spiritual and the practical often intertwined without anyone seeing a difference between them. Here's the quirk. In some places, the ringing of church bells was thought to drive away illness by purifying the air with their sound waves. Villages would sometimes ring the bells longer or at unusual hours during outbreaks, which could be both reassuring and mildly irritating if you were trying to sleep. As you sit in a side pew, an elderly woman approaches the altar carrying a small wooden box. She opens it to reveal strips of linen embroidered with tiny red crosses. These, she says, should be worn over the heart to ward off the pestilence. No one seems entirely sure if this works, but the gesture feels heavy with tradition, and the line forms as people quietly take their turn. Historians still debate how much these protective charms and rituals actually influenced the course of lesser plagues, or if their main effect was psychological, giving people a sense of agency in a time when explanations were scarce. You linger a moment longer, the candles flickering gently as the bell in the chapel's tower strikes the hour. The sound rolls across the rooftops, deep and resonant, and you imagine it spilling beyond the fields and woods, carrying its mix of warning and reassurance into the sleeping dark. The bell's last note fades into the stillness, and you step back into the cool night. The village is hushed now, the clatter of the day replaced by the soft creak of timbers settling and the distant rustle of wind in thatched roofs. The moon hangs low and pale, brushing silver over the dirt lanes and the crooked fences. You make your way slowly toward the little guest loft where you've been staying, passing homes with shutters drawn tight. Through the cracks, you catch glimpses of candlelight and the slow, careful movements of families winding down. Someone ladling out soup, someone else tucking a child into bed. The itch plague has left its mark here, not in mass graves or black banners, but in these quiet rituals of extra care. More prayers before bed, more herbs hung above doors, more stories told to keep worry at bay. A widely accepted historical fact. While the Black Death casts the longest shadow in popular memory, there were many smaller outbreaks in the Middle Ages, often localized, often survivable, that shaped daily life just as surely, if less dramatically. Here's the quirk. Some of these lesser plagues became woven into the village calendar, almost like a season. People expected the rush time or the cough month to come around, and they adapted to it much as we adapt to allergy season today, with a mix of dread, resignation, and oddly cheerful improvisation. As you reach the loft's door, you pause to look out over the fields. The moonlight catches on the dew, turning the grass into a shimmer of tiny mirrors. Somewhere out there, the cause of this rash, be it insect, plant, or something stranger, is still unpinned. Historians still wonder whether it was a single culprit or a dozen unrelated irritations that medieval people lumped into one annoyance. The records are vague, the symptoms inconsistent, and the cures suspiciously tied to whatever a particular village could sell or boast about. You climb the narrow wooden ladder to your sleeping space, ducking under the low beam. The straw mattress smells faintly of hay and lavender, and you settle into it with a slow exhale. From here, the village's faints sounds rise like a lullaby. The soft clink of cooling metal in the blacksmith's forge, a dog's muffled bark, the gentle whistle of wind through a loose shutter. The rash will pass, as it always has. Life will return to its usual pace, and the story will slip into the long braid of other stories told by candlelight in winter. For now, though, there's nothing more to do but rest. The air in the loft is still and warm, with just the faintest drift of cool night air slipping through a small gap in the shutter. You lie there, letting your breathing slow, the quiet weight of the blankets pressing down in the most comforting way. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls, a soft, hollow sound that seems to echo through the fields like a sigh. The moonlight, thin as parchment, slides across the floorboards in slow motion, pooling and shifting as the minutes pass. You imagine the whole village sinking deeper into sleep, the baker with flour still dusting his hands, the washerwoman curled up beside her folded linens, the tavern keeper dozing in his chair by the fire. Even the restless, itchy sufferers of the rash are easing now, their minds drifting toward dreams where no annoyance follows them. And you, safe in this small, high-roofed room, feel the edges of the story loosening. The worries of the day grow smaller, like tiny dots on the horizon, until they're gone entirely. In their place is just this: the rhythm of your breath, the softness beneath you, and the sense of being held gently inside this moment. You picture the fields stretching away under the moon, silver and endless, the hedgerows thick with shadow, the trees standing like quiet sentinels. Somewhere beyond them lies the rest of the world, but it can wait. Tonight belongs to stillness. Tonight belongs to peace. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let the story dissolve into the darkness like ink in water. You are here, and you are safe, and the night is long enough to hold you until the morning light.